Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, President and Executive Writing Coach at Defend, Publish, and Lead. And welcome to episode 292. Writing project management is part of the scholarly writing process. This is an argument I've made in a lot of my research about faculty writing and productivity, but I wanted to talk explicitly today about why it's part of the scholarly writing process. One of the ways that we tend to think about scholarly writing might be a model that we had back in elementary school. So maybe you got some ideas, you did some invention, you did some mind mapping or brainstorming, then you started drafting. And through that process, you might have gone through a couple of cycles of revision potentially. Maybe you had peer review as part of that process where you got some audience feedback. But eventually, most projects, assignments, and so on reach a final stage. We could call it like publishing if we want to talk about it in scholarly writing terms, or we could just say it's when the project is complete. Once it's submitted, then it's over. And sometimes you can go through this writing cycle more than once. For those that are watching this on YouTube, I'm showing an image on screen and I'll describe it for our audio listeners. But if you Google scholarly writing process, you'll see hundreds of images of something very close to what I just described. There might be more steps, there might be fewer steps. It just depends. And so the one that I'm showing on screen actually, I think, represents a pretty good image of what this might look like when we think about our scholarly writing process as being recursive, meaning we can go through various stages over and over again. So the image I'm showing on screen is actually an image from a technical writing essentials book about just the general writing process, but I think it's useful for what we're thinking about. So all the stages we talked about are already there, pre-writing, doing some drafting, you might do some planning, you might organize some ideas. Somewhere in there, there might be some reflection, or maybe you're thinking for a bit. And I really like this particular image because it actually acknowledges that for many writing projects, sometimes you're not actively doing the writing, but you're still thinking about it. So they actually represent a reflection stage. And if you're interested in this image, I will put it in our show notes today so you can check that one out. But it also recognizes that you might have peer or tutor review. You might need to go back and do some additional research or idea generation. There's some editing and proofreading and so on. So I really like this image as a capture of the writing processes for a specific project. And this is where I think the model of scholarly writing process or the writing process, if we're talking about it, falls down. Because for me, it does not recognize anything outside of an individual project, and it doesn't look at the impact of other projects on a current project. So here's what I mean. I'm going to walk through kind of four ways I'm making this argument that that writing project management is part of this writing process. It's a built-in part. It's not tangential. It's not something extra that you do, but it's something that's actually, it requires thinking about it and engagement with it to actually be able to execute any writing project within the scholarly project management system. So here are the four reasons why I think this is the case. And for the record, I'm working them out right now in a book that I'm hoping to have out by the end of next year on writing project management. So yeah, I'd love to hear feedback on any of these concepts, but this is where I'm going with it. So number one of the things that we know when we have a writing assignment, if we're a student in class, or we are maybe writing a scholarly article for a peer-reviewed journal, there's usually some sort of time frame. It is true that academics can work on projects indefinitely. We have a lot of them as clients at Defend, Publish, and Lead that are looking to try to get these projects completed. But in general, there often is a deadline where something is due. But that also means that there could be competing deadlines or many deadlines in a writing project management system. So let's say have five projects that you want to work on at some point. Some are due sooner, some are due later, some don't have deadlines, some are book chapters, some are peer-reviewed articles. So there's just a range of projects and then there's a range of needs for each project. Timing is a choice that has to be made both within scholarly writing projects. So when are you going to work on different parts of the scholarly writing project, but also within the writing project management system as a whole. And that's the part that really has to be taken into account when we think about scholarly writing. So, for example, if I have a project that is due tomorrow, all the other projects that are in my writing project management system probably won't get work done because time is more of the essence for this project that's actually due. But it also means that once that project is turned in, there might be some more room opening up within other writing projects. So all the projects don't rely on a singular, contained, scholarly writing process to complete them because they're all affected by other pieces that we're working on. And this is where I think a general writing process is distinguished from a scholarly writing process because a scholarly writing process assumes we have more than one project going on. So timing is one thing for sure, because if one thing has a deadline, that means that it becomes more important in the writing project management system. So maybe you'll give it more attention, more hours, more time on revision, more talking with colleagues about it. But it also means once it's complete, then there might be time for another project to kind of take that slot as the priority project. I've talked about the priority project concept in other podcasts, basically where if you want to work on a couple projects during the week, one should be the priority. It's really difficult to think about doing each one of them equally. And I'll revisit that in another podcast. But timing is always part of writing project management. So just by default, it becomes part of that scholarly writing process. A second part is choice. So at any given moment, we only have a certain number of hours to work on projects per week, and we cannot work on if you have a writing project management system where maybe you have 19 projects or you have six or you have three. At any point in a writing session, you have to make that choice that you're going to work on a single project. So unless two projects are really closely related and maybe you can kind of jump between them, and that would be kind of a really rare scenario because they probably have different arguments and structures. Choice is a big thing. It's part of that writing project management decision making, but it's also part of the scholarly writing process itself. So by choosing to work on one writing project, you're also choosing not to work on another one. You're deciding in your choice which project is the priority at this current moment during this time in writing. So choice is a big part of it. A third part is something that already exists in the scholarly writing process model, but is not recognized outside of it for writing project management. And here's what I mean by that. In most images of the scholarly writing process, thanks to my colleagues in rhetoric and composition, writing studies, we've been working with a writing process model for more than 50 years, where we recognize that writing has a lot of different stages. It doesn't just go from draft to finished product. There's all kinds of other things going on in there. And that is true. And one of the big parts of the writing process is the way it's captured in writing studies is that revision is an essential element, that the writer is always going back and making changes, sometimes in response to feedback, sometimes in response to just their own, kind of their own reading and changing of how they want to handle the material. But in a writing project management system, we have revision all the time. And that is something that I've often called on this podcast boomerang projects. So, for example, I submitted a book manuscript maybe 2 months ago. At some point in the fall semester, I have my projects kind of picked out that I want to work on in the fall, and I will be busy doing my scholarly writing sessions and busy working. But at some point, that book project will come back as a boomerang, and I will have to do something with it. So revision is not just about inside individual projects, but it's also addressing the impact of revision on your whole writing project management system. This is another way where it is very inherently tied to the scholarly writing process. It's a part of the scholarly writing process, and the two things are complementary, but they're not the same. So in the concept of revision, it's very complementary because revision is something that usually we want to do to make our work better. In the writing project management scenario where you have multiple writing projects, maybe you have 5 projects you're working on, one is out for review. At some point that one out for review will boomerang back to you, and then you will need to make the choices about revision from that point. So that's another reason why writing project management is a part of the scholarly writing process. This is probably the most major reason because revision is an essential element here. The fourth one would be the idea of how we now communicate about our scholarly publications. So, in an article that I wrote a long time ago for the Scholarly Kitchen, due to some work that I was doing with a couple of research groups over in the UK, I made an argument that the scholarly life cycle for publications is a little bit different because now we have to, well, I should say it's a little bit different than maybe the glory days of like 50 years ago or 30 years ago, because now we have to account for the fact that there's way more opportunities to access old work. So your publication might have a longer life cycle than it did previously, but also there is the impact of PR. And part of that is because many academics are becoming their own PR agents about their own work. This is something we talked about a while back on one of our episodes about LinkedIn, in that you'll often see on LinkedIn, or at least I do, maybe because I'm friends with a lot of academics, but one of the things I'll see on there is somebody will say, I'm so happy to report that my new book is out. Here's a link. And then they usually write a little blurb about the book and so on. Sometimes I'm looking at that book like, oh, I really want that, or that's really cool, or I put a note to maybe look at that for a class I'm teaching in the spring. That, before that, yes, there were people that were promoting their work, but not probably in the way that we're doing it now through social media streams and some of the other ways that we do it. Also, our publishers are a little bit more invested in making sure that we're doing some PR on our work, more so probably for books, but even for scholarly journal articles. Because if we think about life cycle, let's take the sciences, for example, many scholarly articles exist in preprints before they ever become scholarly publications. And like the preprint itself is a whole other phase in the scholarly writing process. So, while there might be like an initial draft, and we might just say, well, okay, that's like a rough draft that's out in the preprint stage. In a lot of ways, it exists as a paper that is invited to be commented on. There's peer feedback, and it's crowdsourced. And there's definitely scenarios where preprints can still be out there when the actual later published version is out there. So it's almost like two different drafts are going at the same time. So just in general, all of those things recognize that a scholarly writing process is not the same as just a plain writing process we might have looked at a long time ago with, not any kind of acknowledgement of the impact of writing project management. A scholarly writing process, just out of necessity, understands that sometimes these publications, even after they're already published, will boomerang back to us. Like maybe something will get initial interest, or somebody will discover it, or somebody will want to prove you wrong, and then you'll have to get back into the fray and put out something new or some kind of a response. So there's that. But there's also the idea that you can keep the life cycle for these projects going long after the point that they're actually published. So I have a client right now that's actively working to prove that they have a national reputation. And one of the ways they're doing that is they're trying to get out old publications, just not that publish them again, they're already out, but to raise interest in those again, to get more citations and things like Google Scholar and all those sorts of things. And they're doing it because they want, of course, to get lots of hits and like likes and things like that, or citations, but they're also doing it in a way to keep their work alive. That some of for example, this one scholar is working on a methodology that they really want to become the de facto methodology for this specific area. So, something like that, you have a good say in how much that happens. And that's something that takes time. And what writing project management is not just about the projects, it's also about the time. The reason you're managing all the projects is because there's not enough time to do everything. If there was, you would be doing all of the projects all of the time. So I'm hoping this gave you something to think about. We'll keep looking at some of these concepts to try to get you ready for the fall semester. At the time I'm recording this, this is in August of 2026, before we go back to starting a fall semester. And one of the things I want to point out, if you are not aware about this, you can join us for our fall accountability group that we are running starting August 24th. So really, we like to do low cost, high impact events at Defend, Publish, and Lead. And this one, you can join our group that meets every single week for 15 weeks for just $60. all the resources. You don't have to attend live. You can get the recordings and also the accountability tracker and a lot of the other things that we're doing in there. And just from past experience with our summer group, I know it made a big difference in people getting some work done. So if you know that you're going to need some accountability and you just want to make sure that you've got some kind of a low cost and sort of low stakes touch point, we might be it for you. So check out our show notes and you can see how to find that accountability group. Happy writing this week.